Welcome everybody to Existentialism, existential philosophy. I am looking forward to this journey through this very fascinating philosophical movement, which takes place roughly over maybe a little over 100 years between the middle of the 1800s all the way up to, towards the end of the 1900s or so. And there are still existentialists today, but it's not necessarily as popular a philosophical position as it had been before. Nevertheless, even though fewer people might necessarily themselves identify as existentialists, philosophy itself, writ large, has certainly been changed, adjusted, matured in some ways through by this movement. So it's a very, very important. And also, all of the philosophers that we're going to look at, we're going to primarily focus on 6 philosophers, all of them continue to be referred to today. So even though existentialism as a movement might not necessarily be center stage anymore, the thinkers who had developed it are certainly remain absolutely important. So, all right, now what I've got before us is the primary text that we're going to be using. The course is going to rely fairly heavily on this text, so please do make sure that you've got it. And I'm going to just go over a little bit of the beginning of it. We'll sort of read along together, and I want you to get a sense. I might not do this every week, but I want you to get a sense of what it could feel like to read the text and to read the text with a philosophical interest and in a way that might benefit you the most. So, existentialism, as you see from this introduction, a sort of earthly and earthy outlook, right? So let's have a look at some of the text here, and the vital source, which I'm using here, keeps on showing me this pop-up screen, which asks whether I want to copy or whether I want to highlight. Don't worry about that too much, but I am going to highlight things just so you can see kind of what I'm focusing on as I read it, right? So, all right, let's start. Fundamental orientation of the existentialist outlook, being down to earth, is easy to appreciate. And we'll kind of unpack this a little bit. If an existentialist discusses God, for example, in a positive way, then he or she will conceive of God as an earthly presence, right? So an earthly presence, rather than as a being in heaven, in a heavenly beyond. Right? All right. So notice we're focused on the earthliness, right? The tangibility, the visibility, the experienceable, you could say, something that is actually something that present with us, or something we can actually interact with. If the subject of discussion is the human being, then there will be little interest in the immortality of the soul as a serious proposition. Why? Once again, because existentialism focuses on our earthly life, what we can see and feel and experience here in our existence that we know right now. The focus will be on how it feels to be a human being facing inevitable death, right? This is part of the paradox. We are alive right now, but we know that there will be a moment that comes that we won't be alive, right? So there's that reality, right? Okay. In the same earthly spirit, abstractions such as the perfect circle, right? This is something that was focused a lot on in early mathematical thought. Is it possible for there to be a perfect circle? Or the idea of ideal justice or pure love. Notice these are all expressions that are very much abstract, right? They're not necessarily ideas that we can kind of get our hands or maybe even our minds around. Certainly not anything that we can necessarily see, as it were, right? I mean, we can see circles, but the notion of the perfect circle is more abstract, right? It's a sort of ideal notion of a circle, for example, whose points all are exactly the same distance from a radius, right? So that would be like a perfect circle. But that's all. These are all things that are kind of beyond us, or that are not part of our day-to-day life on this earth. Presumably relied on an otherworldly dimension will be replaced by detailed characterizations of actual things, human relationships and feelings, or this or that place of time, or in this or that place of time. Okay, so we're focusing on what is present with us, what we experience here in this world. Instead of invoking broad generalizations, such as the human being. So notice, even when we could talk about human beings, but then the idea of humanness, or the idea of the human being, Existentialists are going to avoid that because it's too, again, it's too abstract. It's too beyond, it's too, it takes us too far away from our day-to-day experience of life. Refer to people facelessly, collectively, universalistically. So will avoid these broad sweeping terms and instead we'll focus on our existence. So it continues. An existentially oriented interest tends to focus on specific individuals. So in other words, human beings who happen to wear these clothes today, who breathe now at a certain rate, and who presently have particular beliefs and desires in mind. This mentality accordingly recoils at the abstractive, cartoon-like, one-dimensional caricatures of full-blooded, complex people. Right. So in other words, we don't want to stereotype. We don't want uh, to think of people as just kind of like objects or as simple notions to be maybe dismissed or to be described with a basic sentence or two. No, instead, we want to look at the depth of what is going on in people's hearts and minds, in their actual emotions, in their actual experiences, in their memories, in their passions, right, their desires. Right? Okay, right. As when a newspaper labels a certain man a murderer or thief, and then obscures his personal history as someone's son, father, uncle, next door neighbor, and coworker. Right. That's uh, the people actually are these relational humans. It's a mistake to label somebody in these broad sweeping terms, right? Okay, I'm taking a little too long here. I want to make sure that I just want to give you a sense of the reading of the book, how the book comes off, and I also want you to appreciate some of the accessibility of the book. And it's accessible as in it has features that make it more available to those who might have certain kinds of needs, but at the same time, it's also accessible in its readability. Hopefully, you can see it's not trying to use a lot of obscure jargon, but instead, it's trying to put things or just trying to describe existentialism in language that we can relate to and with examples that we can relate to. Right? So again, the general theme is we're moving towards the earthly, the tangible, the physical, what we actually can experience, and we're avoiding the abstract or the obscure or the enigmatic, right, or the unreachable. We're avoiding that, right? We want to see what it's like to analyze our lives as we live them. Okay, although the existentialist outlook is realistic, right, it is relatively recent in its philosophical formulation, just like I was describing earlier, emerging saliently as a culturally influential force only after the scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries. Previously inspirational was an opposing perspective, one that remains strong and popular, namely an abstractive scientific outlook that intentionally disregards or tries to discern beneath and beyond the immediate perceptual details of what appears before us. All right, so now with this paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and highlight it just to get rid of that. What this paragraph is pointing out is that science, even though science is extremely helpful in its domain, right? There's a purpose for science. It is extremely useful. And we're not denying science here at all, not even in the slightest. What instead we're doing is we're thinking, okay, well, yeah, so we know that germs cause many diseases, right? So okay, we know that. Well, how about my own experience of the disease? What does contracting that disease and suffering from it do to my outlook on my own life, right? How does it impact me? What do I feel from that? So also you might remember, and inevitably you have to take at least one science course when you're at this college, and you might notice science gravitates towards principles or rules, right? And those rules are usually fairly abstract. Oftentimes they're mathematized, which again is extremely helpful for its purpose. However, when we're thinking existentially about our own physical experience of the world, those principles or those rules that science gives us, again, that are very important, aren't quite so relevant to our day-to-day experience of life, or to our analysis of the meaning of life, or to the dread that we experience in life's absurdity, or in the inevitability of our death. Science isn't necessarily that helpful there. Right? Okay. So all right, so let's see, talking about, okay. Let's see. Let's move on to the next page. Our goal is to extend for the sake of prediction. Yeah, right. This is describing once again science, right? It's describing these underlying principles that govern the diversity of worldly change. And then the text continues to talk about some of what we gain from science, right? Some of these rules and principles, abstractions, the laws of nature, as you've heard them described. But nevertheless, there's something different about actually experiencing the world, and the chapter will continue to describe that. Okay, so I'll leave the rest of it to you. I've talked for too long, maybe unpacked the sentences a little bit too much, but hopefully you get the idea about existentialism in general, like what its primary initiating drive is, right? What its purpose is to look at life here on Earth and to avoid the abstract, right? To avoid generalizations, but instead to look at the specific, to look at the tangible, to look at the human. Okay, it provides a little bit of a review of philosophical developments before existentialism, and then yeah, and these are important. Please make sure that you kind of have some grasp of these thinkers. Now here it leads up to talking about Kierkegaard, who's going to be the first existentialist we look at, we analyze. We're going to start to do that next week, and then Nietzsche, and so on and so forth. Okay, all right. So please do make sure that you have a strong sense of all the different details of this chapter. Another thing that you'll notice is on D2L. Sorry, I'm going to go ahead and go into D2L here. Excuse the dead air. I just want to show you how I've set up this this course. You've already seen it, but I'm going to give you as students that I see what you see. You've already seen it because inevitably you've reached this video. Oh, and I have a little browser extension I've been working on that will make everything a little bit more visible and a little bit more interesting in your experience of the course, and really of other courses on D2L. It's something else, a little pet project that I'm working on. So yeah, excuse the time it's taking to load. Go to existential philosophy. Okay, here we go. All right. So the way I've set up the course, now I will be putting some news on here, including you'll see actually as soon as I put up the video, you'll see in the news section. But if you go to content, you'll see that I've set up an area that presents the tasks that are coming due. Right? So in other words, what the expectations are that you will do next, and the expectations. I also try to use rubrics as much as possible so you understand exactly what the expectations are, and so that there's a one-to-one correlation between the effort and deliberation you've put into the different tasks and the grade that you're going to receive to them. I want there to be no mystery about how you will be assessed, right? And I want you to know exactly what I'm asking you to do so that you can then do it and then receive full credit for it. Now it's everything I'm going to ask you to do is very meaningful. It's going to enable you to and encourage you to engage with the material, and just about always to connect the material that we're exploring with your own life. Right? And in a way, that's true to form. We're talking about existentialism, which is all about specific experience of the world, your positionness here in this life. All right, but I want to draw your attention also to these core themes. This second module that you'll see here. The core themes module contains the basic ideas that you're going to see recurring throughout much of the course. Most of the thinkers that we're going to explore, most of the 6 primary existentialists that we're going to explore, use these terms fairly regularly, and they address them, they deal with them, they struggle with them, and they try to make them make sense in light of what we experience in our lives. So you'll be expected to kind of know the key terms associated with each of these thinkers. Each of them kind of comes up with a unique idea, several unique ideas as well as their own contributions. But at the same time, there are these general themes, these core themes that are part of existential philosophy writ large. So you should make sure that you're familiar with all of them as we move forward. All right, I wanted to keep this under 15 minutes. Please enjoy the course. I hope you enjoyed learning as much as I enjoy teaching it and exploring it and journeying through it with you.